Hello everyone, Andrew here, and welcome to the final video of 2023. I hope that you're all doing well, that you had a very nice 2023, a Merry Christmas, and that you're having a Happy New Year, and that 2024 is nice for you as well. Hopefully nothing too crazy happens. It's just like you never know what each new year is going to bring these days, but not worrying about what's happening in the future. Instead, let's take a look back at the past and all these gray things behind me here. Sometimes they come in blue, black, gold, silver, all sorts of funky colors. And let's talk about NES games that I beat in the year 2023, just how much progress I've made since the last time we made an update video like this, which would have been at like the end of November 2022. And I'm just going to point out some of my favorites and overall talk about what's been happening on the channel overall, because 2023 was a very exciting year for the game display, and I cannot thank you all enough for your support and just kindness, watching, commenting, and just everything that you've done. It's been wonderful. Really nice to see people enjoying the both edited videos and the live streams, and I look forward to continuing that into the new year. Of course, one of the biggest things that happened this year was that email video. That really blew up, me looking at some old emails that I sent Nintendo back in like 2006. And then at the end of that video, I send Nintendo another email asking when they're going to make another game in the Another Code series, after the series had not been seen for like 15 years. And then all of a sudden, a couple months later, a new Another Code game gets announced. So it's kind of spooky, but you know what? I'm not going to complain. That's definitely my most anticipated game in 2024 so far. It comes out in January, so not too far away. Although this year I spent a lot of time playing the Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection. I absolutely love that. Definitely my most played game in 2023, even if it is a compilation of games from like 10-15 years ago, but they're so good, and it's such a good deal, like 6 games in one, plus different versions for the price of like a single game. So if you haven't picked that up, I highly recommend that. This is not an advertisement anyway, by the way. It's just me kind of, saying what some of my favorite things that I played this year are, but please feel free to post down in the comments below what some of your favorite games this year were. And speaking of games, I still need to play Sonic Superstars. This was a Christmas pickup. People have said it's not the longest game, but it just seems like you can't get too much length out of side-scrolling platformers these days. Mario Wonder, while being a really fun game, also was a little bit on the shorter side, but it was a typical length for a Mario game when you really think about it. So it just seems like side-scrolling platformers are destined to be a little bit shorter in length, while the 3D platformers, a lot more collect-a-thon elements and stuff you can throw into there. I guess that's how they beef up that playtime a little bit. Also, something I got for Christmas is this thing here. It's gonna be a second to turn this on. This thing's really funny, and I love it. There's no sound. It's this shell, and when you touch it enough times, it makes the enemy defeated sound. And eventually you get a 1-up, and there's no sound that a retro gamer likes to hear more than the 1-up sound effect. The more 1-ups and continues you have, the less likely it is that you're being sent all the way back to the beginning and having to replay the whole game over again. I realize how loud this is probably sounding in the microphone. The problem is, though, is that normally in Super Mario Brothers, it's the first 7 enemies defeated with a shell give you points, and the 8th one starts giving you 1-ups. However, this plays 8 enemy defeated sound effects, and then the 9th one is the 1-up sound. So I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder, but otherwise, it's a really neat thing, and sometimes the memorabilia stuff is pretty cool, the toys. I don't know, that one really made me happy, because again, there's nothing I like to hear more than that 1-up sound effect when I'm playing all these crazy games. Again, sometimes you get the nice ones with infinite continues, and other times you get the ones that have like no continues at all. And we played RC Pro-Am recently where you get like 2 continues, so a whole 2 to beat like 24 levels. It's amazing how some games can be so easy and other ones kind of really get to you. But that's why it's so fun, streaming them and talking about them. I hope that you enjoy what we're going to share here today. Because it's funny, the last game we played in 2022 was one called Impossible Mission 2. And this one you may remember as the game with the really funny screaming sound effect when you fall into the bottomless pit. And yeah, this was a pretty fun one to play. It's been brought to my attention that the 3 people so far who are noted as having beat every single North American NES game, they did not include the unlicensed games as part of that. So I'm really kind of the only person out there who's actually playing through all these funky carts again, and not just all the gray ones on the shelf. And I've really enjoyed that, because there are some unlicensed games that I really had fun with, and it's like I'm so happy that I did not just overlook this, because, you know, it's a different cart on the shelf, only sticking to those licensed ones. Ones like the Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, or even Color Dreams game. You know, Crystal Mines wasn't bad. Paradica's Conflict really had potential, even if it fell a little bit short. And, you know, ones like Impossible Mission 2, American Video Entertainment, usually not the most exciting company, but, you know, this one being a port of like a computer game, I think helped that out a little bit. And it's funny because looking at the shelf here, this is all 3 different versions of Impossible Mission 2. For some reason, there had to be 3 different releases on the NES. Like, look at that funky cartridge. You're never gonna see another game coming in a funky cartridge like that. But the reason I point this out is because now the final game that I've beat in 2023 is Rescue the Embassy Mission. I notice also has the word mission in the title. Maybe that has to be a thing. Every year I finish off with a game with the word mission in the title. But it is pretty much exactly, you know, vertically aligned on the shelf, which is pretty cool, because on my game shelf here, from one end to the other is 104 games. So, you know, naturally that makes sense that about 200 games below would be the last game I played this year. Because since the last time I had made an update video like this, so at the end of November 2022, I beat 212 NES games, including both licensed and unlicensed ones. And that's 30 unlicensed games and 182 licensed ones. So again, it's really fun, you know, checking out even those unlicensed ones as well. And according to my calculation, that's 533 games out of 755 games that I have on my list to beat. So we're really getting down to that final stretch. And depending on how many I play next year, you know, it could be the year where we finally, you know, seal the deal and beat every NES game. But, you know, I don't want to rush it. I'm enjoying kind of the pace that we've got here. I don't want to force anything, and we're having fun. And also, again, want to play some other things like, you know, like Sonic here, like I mentioned. And I really haven't touched too much modern gaming stuff recently, aside from playing through the entirety of Super Mario Bros. Wonder in one 13.5-hour live stream. For those who were there to experience that, since YouTube you know, was so kind to kind of slice the end off of it. But yeah, you know, there's a lot of modern stuff and just things for other consoles to play as well. So we're not going to rush it for sure, but, you know, we'll probably get quite close to completing the entire NES library in the new year, which is pretty cool. But yeah, again, that's 212 games since the end of November 2022. And that leaves about, you know, 220 left to go. So again, you know, kind of, you know, 2 more rows down, and we're going to see how that works out. And the reason that this would be, you know, exactly lined up, even though it's a little bit more than, you know, the 200 or so games you'd expect it to be, is because some of them are in the box and such I don't have on the shelf here. So that will cause a little bit misalignment. And also, like right here, you get the Mega Man games, and those are like, you know, 6 Mega Man games that I've already beat. And games I've already beat, even if I pass them on the shelf here, aren't included in the title. But I'm sure we'll play the Mega Man games someday. A stream where I just play through like all 6 of them in one sitting might be kind of fun. And, you know, speaking of how it's 212 games this year, it was about 250 last year. So, you know, the number has gone down a little bit. Things are, you know, opening up more. They're not as locked down as they once were. So that kind of skews the numbers a little bit, just plus how busy you are overall. But yeah, you know, I beat, you know, 10 Super Mario Brothers ROM hacks just a week ago. So, you know, if you include things like that or Famicom games, you know, you can kind of beef those numbers up a little bit as well to how many games I've beat. But I don't think anyone's going to scoff at, you know, 200 NES games in 1 year, which is pretty crazy. But one of the reasons that it is a little bit less is because I did not beat any NES games in the month of November. Instead, I decided to dedicate that entire month to focusing on another goal, and that goal being studying for the Japanese language proficiency test N1, finally trying to pass this silly thing. I wrote it on December 3rd, so maybe that's why you noticed I wasn't, you know, as active a few months leading up to that. And what really kind of sparked my, you know, desire to go at that one again was when I made the Famicom video back in July. It's kind of got me back into Japanese, back into, you know, wanting me to explore the Famicom library so much more. And that's been a lot of fun, you know, and then, you know, getting back into studying was a lot of fun. This right here is just kind of like, you know, the Japanese comprehensive text from J Research. J Research Publications is like one of my go-tos when it came to Japanese textbooks. They did this one. They've done like the advanced 2800 vocabulary, which is really good if you're getting ready for the JLPTN one. A lot of people like the Somatome books, and, you know, they're pretty good too. But, like, you know, compare the thickness of those. There's a lot less words in here than there are in here. So I like this book as well, but this one definitely rounds out the edges that the other one doesn't hit at. So if you have any questions about the JLPT, I'd be happy to answer them. But most people are probably just like, what's going on? What's he talking about all this stuff? So we'll move on from that. Although in the kind of more exciting side of Japanese things, that also relate to me in some way, is that finally this year, the English translation, English localization of the legendary Starfy for the GBA, the first one, which was for some reason never localized. They only officially localized the 5th and final one on the Nintendo DS, but you can finally play the original first one completely in English. The patch is out officially now, 100% done, which is awesome. I translated pretty much the entire text for this back in 2019. And it sat in limbo for a long time because there was some graphics work that still needed to be done, some stuff on the technical side. So there's just so much that goes into creating a fan translation. It's certainly not just translating the text, but there's so many different people who have to come together and play different parts. And I'm so thankful that, finally after these years, people were able to come together and, tidy those parts up. And then that translation I did all those years ago, comes together and it's out there for everyone to enjoy now. So go ahead and play the first legendary Starfy game out of 5. So, that leaves, 3 more to be translated out there, but the first one's really good, and I need to play the second and third one at some point, so maybe we'll check those out. But yeah, so it's always exciting when a project like that you work on, finally gets released. So that's some good Japanese news. But aside from that, let's jump back more into the NES stuff here. So again, the last game we beat last year was the Impossible Mission 2, and immediately after that is the Incredible Crash Dummies, and this is a game published by LJN. I know what you're thinking, oh no, LJN. Well, this is actually like 1993, 1994 LJN. And, a lot of companies that weren't so great in the earlier NES days, it's amazing how they could kind of clean up their act near the end. And this is actually a much better LJN game than you might expect. It's a pretty solid platformer. The whole Incredible Crash Dummy series exists, I guess, to tell people to wear their seatbelts. There's a lot of messaging like that throughout the game, which is kind of funny. But overall, it's just kind of a solid platform, and I had a lot of fun with it. And we've looked at other LJN games on my channel. We've streamed them. Games like Jaws, they're from LJN, but they're not too bad either. But the next game that comes immediately after that, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, this one is published by Mindscape. And when you see Mindscape, that to me means you should run in the opposite direction as quickly as possible. Mindscape, in my mind, is far, far worse in the quality department than LJN is. On average, you get some stinkers from LJN like Back to the Future and such. But Mindscape, I find, has a much bigger track record of not having the best games, and this is one. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the perspective's weird, you try to jump, but he's always jumping downwards for some reason. It is just such a weird game, and not the most enjoyable one in my mind. And yeah, it has that Mindscape name, you kind of slapped onto it there. But on the other end of Indiana Jones, you get the Last Crusade games, and we streamed both of those in a single sitting, both Taito and Ubisoft version of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's amazing how you can have two games that look so similar. The cartridges are almost identical except for those company logos, and yet the games are so different. And the Taito one was a lot of fun, pretty accurate to the movie, while the Ubisoft one was just like a port of a Game Boy game onto the NES with hardly any color added in. And yeah, that was the experience we had there. Although, continuing our talk about continues, this is a game that gives you passwords after each stage, so at least we didn't have to replay anything when we died. We could always just kind of warp right back to where we left off, which was really nice. But again, just in this little conversation we've had here, you can already see just the kind of wide range of different games you can encounter on the NES. Different difficulties, different qualities, different amount of continues. It's just, you never know what you're going to get into when you pull another game off the shelf. And that's what I love. Through this challenge of beating every single NES game, I've discovered so many things I never would have imagined, playing through originally, and never would have thought I would enjoy. But, now I have so many favorites on the NES. If I made a top 10 list today, it's amazing how many games on that would be ones that I've beaten just the last couple of years, where if I'd made it a few years ago, it would have been so many of the typical ones, like Mega Man 2 and Zelda and stuff, where those guys probably wouldn't even be in my top 10 these days, which is kind of incredible. Mega Man 2 though, I love Mega Man 2. I don't know, someday I will definitely make a top 10 and we'll see what gets in there. There'll probably be like 1 or 2 games you'll be like, oh, that's on everyone's list, just because they truly are the best. But there's going to be a lot that you haven't heard of either that I really, really enjoyed. And again, some we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes here as well. So just to go back to Mindscape one more time, since I did rag on them a little bit there, maybe I was a little too hard on them, because they have the odd, not so bad game as well. Every company can have their diamond in the rough, and Infiltrator coming up in the I section as well wasn't the worst game. And this is an example of one where if you just play the beginning, you put the game in to check it out, say, okay, this is the kind of game that is, immediately take it back out, you're going to miss like everything. It's phenomenal just how many NES games incorporate multiple genres. So by just playing the first level, you're probably missing elements of the game that aren't introduced until later on. And that's definitely the case with Infiltrator. First thing it looks like is you're taking off in this helicopter, and it probably gives you like Top Gun vibes, first person, shoot 'em up in the sky. There's also some stealth elements to it. There's actually a lot here that you need to learn. Like, the instruction manual is very, very, very complicated, trying to figure out how to play this game, figuring out how to not be attacked by others, also figuring out how to land when the time comes. But if you can figure all of that out, you enter a top-down stealth section, kind of Metal Gear style, which is actually really cool. You sneak into buildings, check out file cabinets and drawers and such, look for card keys, even put on the uniform of the enemies so that they don't notice you as easy. You can get different items that you can use along the way, and there's different objectives that you have to accomplish, all within kind of a time limit without being caught. It's really, really cool. And again, it's a Mindscape game, so it has some rough edges to it for sure. But this was just a really good example of one that I didn't expect it to take this turn after the initial helicopter section, but when it did, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. So if you're looking for kind of a bootleg Metal Gear on the NES, this is certainly one that you can check out. Just you're gonna have to learn how to do the helicopter sections, which is easier said than done. I feel like if they had just made the game the more stealthy part, it would have gone over a lot better. But again, companies love to kind of incorporate different genres into a single game. It's like they challenge themselves to see just how much they could stick in there. We're gonna look at some games again coming up that really encapsulate that, but they're from Konami, so you know that they did a good job of it, because Konami, truly the best when it comes to NES games in my mind. But the next one we're looking at in the I section is Iron Tank. Now, Iron Tank is like if you gave the tank from Ikari Warriors its own game, because we all thought when we played Ikari Warriors that tank, that guy is going to be a star someday. It needs its own game, so Iron Tank is literally just that. Now you are always stuck inside this tank, and it's actually like a really fun running gunner, except it's not so much running because you're in this tank. But the coolest part is that if you pause, you get to see a map with all these lines that lead north and eventually meet at the end. And the really cool part is that there are so many different paths that you can take through the game. Multiple paths that converge and meet and then, diverge again. And again, since I've only played through this game once, and even just to do one of the paths is, quite a journey. There's actually lots of replay value to go back here and play, to even just try to find out how to get to some of these paths, because it's not always so clear. So I'm really looking forward to going back and playing more Iron Tank someday. Some of SNK's earlier games are really rough, like Ikari Warriors, like Alpha Mission, like Athena, which I think, if you followed my channel for a little bit now, we've talked about Athena, and the Nintedium video. Some of my favorite things I did this year. Definitely want to make more of those. Especially the Athena one, just like 40 minutes of just ragging on Athena, and yet I still has a special place in my heart. It's a fun game, but man, does it certainly have some flaws. But going back to Ikari Warriors as well, that actually showed up after the last video that we made. So again, that last kind of video where I talked about beating 250 NES games, that was at the end of November 2022. So Ikari Warriors came in December, and people may know Ikari Warriors, one of the absolute most difficult NES games out there. And again, coming up in December, it was kind of like, oh man, this is clearly one that's going to take weeks of just practice and memorization, and it is a slow game. It is 4 stages, but it is so slow, and the stages are so long that you essentially just have to memorize what's going on, because if there's one thing that really makes this game not great, it's the controls. You can't just, press the direction that you want to face and then your character faces that direction. They have to turn, walk in a circle until they face where you want them to face. And good luck doing any quick, timed combat with a system like that. At least in Ikari Warriors 2, you can strafe, and you also get way better weapons. So Ikari Warriors 2, while still kind of a janky game, is much more manageable. But Ikari Warriors 1, I had to use the classic ABBA code, and I got to the end of it like that, and I said, you know, this is one where I think I really want to dedicate the time to it someday. Maybe I'll make like a journal out of it, Andrew's Ikari Warriors journal, and we can, you know, start from scratch and see just how long it takes me to really figure that out, and I can give like a day-by-day update or something like that. So while I beat the game, I did use the code, and I do hope to go back someday and do it like a legit run. But yeah, just be aware of that. Because yeah, Ikari Warriors, I was just not in the place to play that game when I hit it on the shelf. So I think it'll be fun someday to kind of go back and do that for real. But I have seen the end of it because of the code. I need to get a shirt that says like ABBA on it or something. I'll be like, oh, you're a fan of that band? I'll be like, yeah. And that's definitely what's going on here. Oh man, so many crazy games. But yeah, you know, I could talk all day about so many of these different ones, and that was what was really great about my NES ranking series. A lot of people have been asking when that's going to come back. We did the numbers, we did the letter A, we did like the first half of the letter B, so we're not too deep in terms of ranking all the games, but that series is so wonderful. You know, for being able to take games and just really kind of give them a minute or two in the limelight and talk about ones that, you know, people might be particularly interested in, and also ones that maybe people haven't heard about before, and introduce them to it, which is you know, a really great thing about that series. So I definitely want to get back to that. In fact, I think it was on the one for the letter A, My Retro Life, an awesome YouTube channel, talks all about his experiences growing up with all sorts of awesome games, and he left a comment where he's like, really great content, great on-camera personality. I mean, after you get a comment like that, it's like, you know, how do you not continue with the series? So we're definitely gonna hopefully get back to that in the new year. But overall, we had a lot of incredible, you know, people show up on the game display this year. Like again, My Retro Life. Justin Silverman showed up in my Rambo stream just in time to see me die to the final boss, which I don't know how I even died to that guy. I was, you know, dealing so many hits. Of course, one of those final bosses with no health bar, no indication that you're even doing damage, but you know, Justin Silverman was there just in time to see me flub up, so that was always fun. Retro Rick, in one of his videos, he used a clip from my 190-in-1 multi-cart video, which is pretty cool. Maybe he'll do a clip from my 1101 Arbia Nights one as well. Of course, Andrew G in the chat, one of the OG YouTube speedrunners, did all sorts of Mario games, plays Excitebike now. Always wonderful to hear from him. And a clip from one of my videos was even included in a video on YouTube's main page. Like this video made specifically for that YouTube main page, featuring all sorts of different retro gaming YouTubers, and I happen to be the very first person who shows up in this video, and last time I checked it had like over 3 million views, so you know, I was there with some pretty awesome YouTube personalities. No idea how that one managed to happen, but yeah, it's like, there you go. It's been a really exciting year on the channel for sure. Again, you know, even with the, you know, videos like the email one, and then when I sent Nintendo a physical letter after that, we had some really successful videos. And just a really awesome year on the channel overall. And again, I really thank everyone for your support throughout, and hope you continue to enjoy what's coming up in the future years. So continuing on with games that I beat in 2023, James Bond Jr. is another funny one. This is one that I played way back when we did my Random Game of the Day series. Does anyone remember that? That was back like 2012, 2013, when every day, pretty much, I would just pick a random game and we'd play it for like 20 minutes, although sometimes they would end up being like 120 minutes. That series started out, it was just supposed to be like a little short thing to introduce people to different games, and eventually those videos started to explode into like, you know, hour to 2 hour long parts. It was crazy, but I had a lot of fun with that, and you know, people always enjoyed it as well, which was really cool. And I look at streams today as kind of replacing that, because streams are very much, you know, we're just gonna take a game, doesn't always have to be a rhyme or reason to why we're playing it, but we're gonna play it. And, you know, that's kind of replaced what Random Game of the Days used to be, so I think that's pretty cool. The Game Boy Grab Bag in particular has been a really fun thing. Definitely want to do more of that. Maybe we can do that with other consoles as well. I think it would be a lot of fun. But we're supposed to be talking about James Bond Jr. This is a game developed by Eurocom. They did a few NES games. We're going to be looking at another one in a minute. And this is a lot of fun. I like that you have these timed missions. And again, you know, we're speaking about you know, long periods of time. Like the first level, for example, you get 45 minutes to deactivate these 4 missiles and then go defeat a boss. So that's a really massive level if they're giving you 45 minutes to do it. And it's just really fun exploring it and finding items that help you reach new areas. It's almost Metroidvania in a sense, except for the fact that, again, this game is broken up into different levels, so it's not as Metroidvania as it could be. The biggest issue with this game, however, being that enemies take way too many hits to defeat. You have to mash that button for so long before some enemies will go down. And then on the flip side, you also take a lot of hits before you're defeated, but then why not just reduce the number of hits that everyone takes? And it will save your thumb and your B button from wearing out. So that's kind of, one spot where there's a little bit of a flaw. But overall, I think this game is really cool. It probably deserves a little bit more attention. Not the longest game either, but yeah, check out James Bond Jr. if you ever get a chance. It's not GoldenEye, but, still pretty fun. And then after that, we move into the caves, and we played Carnov, and it wasn't even Carnovember, which was a thing I had no idea existed, until E.C. Myers Vids showed up in the comments. The first time I think we ever met, and he commented about that. Yeah, Carnovember, like that's so clever. I guess we just kind of missed November for me to play through Carnov again there, but we did stream this one, so hopefully everyone enjoyed, when we did that. It was a pretty cool game. Data East, porting, lots of arcade games and such to the NES. You're usually gonna have a pretty good time when one of their games comes up. And then overall, there was lots of other streams too this year. Like Kid Cool was another NES game that we played, and that's one by Vic Tokai. And Vic Tokai is pretty funny because some of their games are just like blatant ripoffs of other series that were on the NES and Famicom. And with Kid Cool, you can very clearly see that it was inspired by Super Mario Brothers, except with way worse controls. I don't know what you're thinking. It's natural for companies to see what's successful on the NES and to want to replicate that, absolutely. But I feel like Vic Tokai, more than any other company, was just so blatant about it. They're like, we don't even care if you see that this is Super Mario Brothers. Or, especially with the Cryon Conquest, another game that we streamed this year. It's like, they're not even hiding that this looks 110% like Mega Man, but I loved it. As long as, if you're gonna rip off a game, just do a good job of it. And while the Cryon Conquest certainly has some jank, some control jank for sure, and just some programming jank as well, because unfortunately in my initial stream of this game, we did not beat it. I made it right to the final level, and the first stage of the final boss there is actually a glitch, which threw me for a complete loop. So I had to make a whole video about this, dedicated to it, on my channel, where we dive into just what's happening with the code. And not only do I look at that final boss, but I look at all of the bosses to see some really funky stuff going on. So even though I didn't beat it on stream, I kind of look at that video as the conclusion to that, because there was a lot to say there. And again, that's considered that Nintedium series of videos, which has 5 to this point. It has Battletoads, it has Athena, it has the Cryon Conquest, it has Bad Street Brawler, which is another game that, again, if you want to hear about some crazy NES games, that's what I love about this series so much. And of course, it has the Blues Brothers, which is another really funky one. And you may notice I'm kind of going in alphabetical order when it comes to those videos as well. So they kind of go hand in hand with the NES ranking videos, which my plan was always to kind of finish up all of the games I want to make Nintedium videos for, and then I will rank all of the games which fall within that category. So like I got the Blues Brothers videos out, and then my plan was to do the rest of the Bs, because that was kind of the last video I wanted to make a Nintedium video about from that set at that time. But then of course, the kind of ranking video never came, but it will. I really hope to get that out early next year, and I really thank everyone for your patience in that. But speaking of pretty janky games, how about The Last Starfighter? I live streamed that one as well. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was like, okay, this game, it's not going to be that bad, right? It ended up being an over 6-hour stream, and the part that hurts the most is about halfway through, I had a really good run. We made it to the final level. I was this close to beating it, and we ended up getting destroyed. The classic choke technique, who could forget it? So we had to replay the whole game several more times before I finally squeaked out that winning run. And that's the thing about NES games or playing retro games, is you have to have that mental strength to push on, even when victory is within grasp. Unfortunately, kind of fall on your face in those last seconds. But I love the retro games so much, especially NES games. And you've seen from all my streams, it's never about like frustration and anger. It's always just shoot, let's do it again. And that's just how I do it. I wouldn't play them if I wasn't having fun. So that's why, I hope that all of you have enjoyed the streams, and yeah, if you want your retro entertainment without all the anger mixed in, this is the channel for you. But I'm certainly not going to hesitate from pointing out the silly glitchy things as well. And then speaking of which I don't really know why I would say that, considering the next game isn't really that glitchy or anger-inducing. We streamed this one as well, Linus Spacehead and the Cosmic Crusade. This was the first Codemasters game of several that I would end up beating in the year 2023, and Codemasters games are really fun, typically, but they're really tough. Linus Spacehead being an anomaly where you can continue pretty much as you want, but it's so common for the unlicensed games to have a very limited number continues, or no continues at all, as is usually the case with the Chimerica Codemasters games. Yeah, so we live streamed that and had a good time, but I'm realizing now, on my list here, I skipped over a game that I was really excited to talk about, and that was Laser Invasion. I promised you that there would be more games on here that really combined different genres, and this was a combination I was really not expecting to see. Laser Invasion was kind of marketed as the game to play with the laser scope, a crazy accessory where you put it on your head and you scream things, and then it fires at the screen. But you don't have to play it with that. In fact, it was probably much more enjoyable the way I did it with the zapper. But the way this game starts out is that first you have that first-person flying shoot-'em-up section, which we kind of saw back in Infiltrator, except here it is done so well. This is a later Konami game, so they really took what they learned from the Top Gun games, which came out before, and they worked out all of the kinks. Like, wow, does it feel good to fly and fight enemies in this game. Like, there is no problem whatsoever going where you want to go and doing what you want to do. I was never like questioning the controls, like, oh, why is it so stiff or whatever. No, Laser Invasion has probably the best first-person flying I have seen on the NES to this point. I absolutely loved it. But again, this is another game where if you stop there, you'll think that's the entire experience. But no, once you finish the flying portion, you land, and then it's an on-rails zapper portion, and this is very similar to what we saw in the Adventures of Bayou Billy, which if you watch some of my previous videos, you'll know was another Konami NES game I absolutely loved, and that was one that I encountered way back when I started my NES completion adventure, and it really blew my mind just how well it combined, those three genres, the beat 'em up, the light gun, and the driving. So to find another Konami game which essentially did that exact same thing but with different genres was just so cool. And again, this zapper section's pretty good. But after this, you enter a first-person dungeon exploration section, which while you're exploring these dungeons, enemies will show up that you have to fight with the zapper. My mind was blown. Like, you're controlling the D-pad with one hand to explore the dungeon, and you've always got to have your other hand on the zapper in case enemies jump out. Like, like, I was just so amazed by this combination of genres. I never expected something that cool to like explore a first-person world and have to have the zapper ready for if enemies jump out. Like, I don't know. That really blew my mind. Maybe I'm just silly. But basically that combination of genres, and the first person flying was never my thing. Like, you look at Airwolf, which we hit way back at the beginning of the NES library. That would probably have knocked out like 99% of people from wanting to play through every NES game right there. That game is rough. Airwolf. But compare that to what they were able to do with Laser Invasion, and then add in those other elements as well. Absolutely one of my all-time favorite NES games now. I cannot recommend it enough. And it's a Konami game, so it's going to have an incredible soundtrack all throughout that just makes the experience even better. So play Laser Invasion if you ever get the chance. You don't need the laser scope, despite the fact that laser's in the name. But not only that, because you had Laser Invasion, and then not too far down the line, you had another Konami game. And I saw this one coming up on the shelf, and I was like, okay, I see the Lone Ranger coming up on the shelf. And it's like, I don't know all that much about the Lone Ranger. It's an older series. How are they going to turn this into an NES game? But I also saw on the end label there that it's also a Konami game. And I'm like, okay, Konami hasn't done me dirty yet. So I'm going to have faith in them that they turn the Lone Ranger into an incredible NES game. And my god, is it absolutely one of the best things I have ever played. The Lone Ranger, I have no attachment whatsoever to the Lone Ranger, and it blew my mind. I was so hyped. So, the Lone Ranger again, introducing all sorts of different genres in one game. And you're not even going to know it unless you actually dive in there a little bit. So you start on an overworld map, you have some towns which you sometimes have to go into and talk to people, and the English is kind of broken. The town sections are definitely kind of the most not exciting parts of the game, I'll give it that. But it's the combat sections that are really fun. So when you're on this overworld map, maybe sometimes you get into a battle with some thieves, and it turns into a top-down shoot 'em up section, which is really cool. Almost like some of the levels from Super C. So I mean, that's kind of cool, right? You also get areas that play like the dungeon exploration from Laser Invasion. So now you're exploring caves, or you're exploring buildings, where you're controlling with the D-pad, and you also always have to have that zapper ready in your other hand. You just never know when enemies are going to jump out. I mean, okay, still, that's pretty cool. Sometimes on the overworld map, you encounter other people on the horses, and you have to get into a battle with them with the zapper to take them out while they're coming at you. Okay, that's pretty cool too. By far, what makes the Lone Ranger one of my all-time favorite NES games is the side-scrolling levels that play exactly like Castlevania, except you have a gun. So you don't have to worry about some whip that only travels like 2 feet. You can defeat enemies from like the other side of the screen, assuming that you have the appropriate gun upgrades. But yes, like Castlevania platforming. Who knew? Who would have known? But like, these levels were so much fun. I had so much fun with the Lone Ranger and just all those different genres combined. It was such an awesome game. But it's really hard, like really, really difficult. And that's part of why I love it as well, because it holds no punches. The game is divided into 8 chapters, and in these 8 chapters, you can have those side-scrolling levels, you can have the dungeon exploration with the zapper, you can have those top-down shooting sections, you can have like everything combined into one. And you get 1 life. And if you die at any point during a chapter, you have to play the entire chapter over again. So it is really tough to make progress. You do get a password after each chapter, so you don't have to play the whole game in one sitting. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Where in Castlevania, you might get like 3 levels, and then, you know, you get multiple lives. So if you die during one of those levels, you can just start at the beginning of it. But, you know, it's like 3 levels, and then you kind of start like a new block, and then, you know, another 3 levels, and, you know, there's a lot more leeway. But the Lone Ranger, you get 1 life, and if you lose it, you're playing that whole chapter again. Oh, just how unforgiving it was, even added to the experience for me. All that much more. Okay, that was the Lone Ranger on the NES. I hope that conveyed just how much I love that game. Again, I knew nothing about the Lone Ranger essentially going in, but I was left so impressed with the game. It was just so much fun, and again, it just took all these different genres, smacked them together, and it just works so well. I cannot recommend enough that people check out the Lone Ranger. Although unfortunately, unlike Laser Invasion, the Lone Ranger is a much rarer and more expensive NES game. Just, you know, on account of being like one of the last ones that Konami released for the NES, I suppose. But man, okay, yeah, people. Okay, for anyone who's left, for anyone who didn't get scared away by my Lone Ranger obsession. Let's move on to the M section. Let's just get out of the L's before I get too excited about that again. Maniac Mansion is definitely in the top spot in terms of Jaleco for me to this point. It's an adventure game where your girlfriend's been kidnapped, she's in this house, trapped by Dr. Fred, and it's your job to go in there along with 2 of your friends who you get to pick. So Dave is always part of your team, no matter what, but you then have to choose 2 other people to come in with you. And combined, all of them have different skills that they will need to use to solve different puzzles, which will ultimately lead you to the end. So this is another game that has a lot of replayability, because you can choose different characters, which will then cause you to think about things in different ways, and the puzzles that you solve, which ultimately lead you to the end, will be different as you have to do different things to kind of progress further into the game. Really, really cool idea. And again, I've only gone played it the one time. I haven't gone back to do additional playthroughs of it, so I do look forward to in the future choosing different characters and seeing what kind of different things I might have to do as them. Because there's definitely parts of the mansion where you're like, oh well, I never had to do anything with that. So clearly that's if I had chosen some different characters, things might have progressed a little bit differently. But again, a game with a lot of replayability and just overall a really, really, really fun game. Great soundtrack, really, really good job on that one. And again, if you haven't played Maniac Mansion, I definitely recommend it. It's funny because just after I beat that, I beat the game and I wanted to look more into it, I found that limited run games, I think just recently, at the time I had beat it, done a re-release of it on the NES with all the kind of pack-ins that it would have come with originally, because Maniac Mansion in the box even has like a fold-out poster that has some hints on it. Like you can interpret different things on this poster as different hints that might help you throughout the game. So I know that the limited run games one had that with it, as long as there's probably a whole bunch of other bonus stuff as well. So that would have been cool to know about, but it was a little bit too late. But yeah, just again, that was actually a really cool idea for an NES game to bring back. Definitely, if you can ever get your hands on Maniac Mansion, you should check that one out. But otherwise, I mentioned Mega Man 1 through 6. I didn't have to play those according to the adventure because I'd already beat those many times in the past, but I'm sure you'll see those on stream in the future at some point. And then that brings us to Metal Gear, finally. After I don't know how many times over the years, I've taken Metal Gear off the shelf, said, okay, I'm gonna beat it this time. Put it into the NES, played a bit of it, wrote down the password and said, I'll come back to this later, and I just never made it all the way through to the end. Hackin' Quackin' joined me in a stream where we played for again, 6 hours straight, and we beat Metal Gear all the way through. And it was a fun experience. It's not as much about stealth as you would think. Infiltrator is probably more of a stealth game than Metal Gear was. Even though you don't want to alert guards whenever possible. You're not normally in too much of a situation where, if they do get alerted, you're in big trouble. And most people I've found, reading about it on the internet afterwards, there's one part where you get an enemy bug placed in your inventory, and it's so easy to not even realize that because it's not an item that's mentioned in the instruction manual. So you start going throughout the game and enemies are being alerted without you even really understanding why, and it's because you've had this transmitter placed on your person and you have to manually remove it from your inventory, but you don't even know what it is. You just think, okay, it's an item I picked up somewhere. I need to use it at some point, but no. So I was being chased by enemies all throughout the game. Stealth, completely irrelevant at that point, since, again, they all knew where I was anyway. But, that's just how Metal Gear on the NES is. Of course, it's not as faithful as, Kojima would have liked. But yeah, that was Metal Gear on the NES. Pretty cool. And we got Snake's Revenge coming up too, which I'm looking forward to in the S section. Hopefully it won't be too much longer before we get there. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Next up is Micro Machines, another gold cartridge. Micro Machines was so cool. It really taught me a lot about racing games. I've played a lot of Mario Kart. I've never been too much of a racing game person, but again, another great part about the NES adventure is just how much I've had to play different genres. And, it's amazing how much I've found I like genres more than I expected to. And Micro Machines, kind of being more of a top-down racer and not so much a, first or a third-person one like some racing games are. This was a lot of fun, but it really teaches you a lot about how you have to drift properly and, take corners and about the different speeds and vehicles. Very, very tough game. And, it's another Codemasters one which has no continues. So it's 25 races, and it is so easy to get deep into it and then lose all your lives and have to start all over again. But when I beat it, I was so happy. And it came down to the very last race. I was on my very last life. You have to come in first, and on the last turn I was in second, and I'd messed up partway through the race, which is typical. For me, getting so late into a game, and you have that moment where you kind of mess up. But I didn't give up. It would have been so easy to kind of just be like, get up, all right, slap the reset button, try again. But I pushed on. And on the very last turn before the finish line, I don't know how the heck the computer messed up so bad, but I passed them and I won, and it will always be one of my favorite NES moments. But yeah, Micro Machines is a great game. And again, an example of if I wasn't playing the unlicensed games, I would have missed that one. I know a lot of people say that Micro Machines is good, but you don't realize just how much fun it is. So you really kind of sit down there with the plan to play all the way through it. So check out Micro Machines on the NES if you get the chance, even though it's one of those funky Codemasters Comerica Gold carts. It was a lot of fun. But then, finally, we're at that NES game that's not so great to kind of, bring the mood down a little bit. And that is the Mutant Virus, one of the most difficult, craziest, jankiest NES games I have played. This guy shrinks down, goes inside the computer to fight the viruses hand to hand. I guess, no one knew how to program antivirus software at that point, so they just shrunk people down to go fight them physically. However that works. But basically, you're this guy inside this computer, and the virus is spreading, and you have to spray it to turn it all into a color, and then it will disappear and the room will be cleared. But it's a virus, right? It just spreads and spreads, and sometimes it feels like no matter how much you shoot it, there's nothing you can do to contain it. You get bombs sometimes which you can place around, but they're limited per stage. And the controls are just pretty rough as well. And it's just so easy to die and lose all your lives, but the saving grace of the Mutant Virus is that it has infinite continues. It is 5 levels long, and you're not going to want to have to replay any of them, because each one is more tedious than the last. I actually made a community post about this one. It was the first NES game that I ever left on all night long to kind of keep my progress where it was and not have to replay it again. However, what happened was, I did eventually reach the point where I said, okay, I think I need a break from this. I don't want to leave my console on too long. So I eventually ended up turning off the AV Famicom, went back to it about a day later. I think it was on my 3rd try, I managed to beat level 5, which was just mind-blowing after this game seemed so impossible previously. And yeah, that was it. Suddenly the Mutant Virus was done, and I wasn't going to complain, but we're definitely going to have to stream this one again at some point. What happened was I should take it out here. Where is the Mutant Virus? Where is it? Grab it off the shelf here. What ended up happening was, and what ended up kind of making the difference was I took some notes, which really helped me out in level 4 and level 5. Again, like I mentioned, there was some different items you can pick up, some bombs. Just noting, which rooms you should tackle first and which items you should pick up in which rooms and then use in which other rooms was really key to kind of figuring that out. Also noting down at what time the virus starts to spread more violently, because if you take too long, that's another factor about the Mutant Virus, is that, things start to potentially explode and you really got to be on your toes. It's incredible how a run can so easily be beaten, where you think, you're doing slow and steady, things are going well, and then it's like, oh, there's a breach in this room, so you gotta abandon the room that you're currently working on, run to that room to kind of quell the breach, but then while you're doing that, other rooms start to kind of blow up. So just, the more information you have going in, the more you kind of just observe what's going on, write it down if you have to, form a battle plan. So often that's kind of what you need to do to beat a game. And in the case of the Mutant Virus, it really, really worked. So you can bet that if we play that again on stream, I'm going to be using my notes there to kind of give me the upper edge. But then what happened after that? After the Mutant Virus, let's get out of the M section. The M section took me a particularly long time. Lots of NES games that ended up starting with the letter M. But moving on to N, we got Ninja Gaiden 1 through 3. And I had beaten Ninja Gaiden 1 previously, so I didn't play through it again in this particular case. It was actually like a Thanksgiving years ago. I remember it just the turkey was being cooked, and I was like, oh man, I want some turkey, but I should play an NES game to kind of hold me over until that's ready. And just for whatever reason, I pulled Ninja Gaiden off the shelf, and I got all the way to level 6, and that's the one where, the final boss is at the end. But if you die to the final boss, it sends you all the way back to the beginning of the world, not even just the beginning of the level that you were at. And that was kind of whipping my butt. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to beat that by the time dinner was ready, but I did end up coming back to it later that night with turkey power, and I just kind of grinded that until I finally beat Ninja Gaiden 1. So that's my Ninja Gaiden 1 story. I was looking for a game to play until the turkey was ready, and ended up taking much longer past when the turkey was ready. But moving on to Ninja Gaiden 2 and 3 now as part of the NES adventure. Ninja Gaiden 2, definitely the easiest one of the bunch. Very forgiving in terms of checkpoints. Pretty much just, if you die, you're never usually going back too far. Definitely not to the degree that Ninja Gaiden 1 would send you back sometimes, so that was pretty good. Ninja Gaiden 2, definitely the one I would recommend playing if you're looking to play an NES Ninja Gaiden game. Ninja Gaiden 3, also not too bad, but the biggest difference they made, and this is a North American version exclusive difference, is that you have a limited number of continues in Ninja Gaiden 3. I believe it was 5, and once you run out of those, you have to start the whole thing over again, which again, Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2, as unforgiving as they could be at times, never had limited continues. You could always at least start at the world that you left off on. The thing about Ninja Gaiden 3 though is that it does have some nice quality of life improvements, like being able to just, after you climb a wall, jump directly up onto the platform instead of having to do like a weird like sea jump onto it. And there's also a weapon which improves the length of your sword so that you don't have to be so up in enemies' faces when you're attacking them. So Ninja Gaiden 3, definitely did some nice things, but especially towards the end of the game, it still gets very difficult, and you're probably going to have some trouble, getting all the way through it with just the continues that it gives you without some practice. But still, really fun game, some great music, great graphics. Ninja Gaiden games were really fun overall, and definitely recommend checking them out. I feel like there was another thing I wanted to say about Ninja Gaiden 3 as well. Oh, I think just again to touch on that, the Japanese version is so different. Not only does the Japanese version have infinite continues, it also has a password system, so you can continue from where you left off. So if you're looking for a bit of an easier Ninja Gaiden 3 experience, the Famicom one apparently delivers in that department. Following Ninja Gaiden 3 though, Paperboy 1 and 2, we streamed both of these. Paperboy 1 has always haunted me. It's always been an NES game that I wanted to beat. So to finally be able to do that on stream was really cool. And knock off the sequel as well, which was much more difficult. Features 3 streets instead of just 1. That was really great. Thank you to everyone who joined for that stream. And then after that, we get to Power Blade. So my whole NES adventure started as a result of me getting Power Blade 2 for the NES in November of 2021, and then saying, you know what, I haven't even beat Power Blade 1, so I'm gonna do that. So I pulled Power Blade 1 off the shelf, and it was incredible, and it still stands as one of my favorite NES games. It's just such a cool experience. We talked about the Cryon Conquest being like Mega Man. Power Blade is even more like Mega Man in a way, and it has the incredible soundtrack to back it up, really, really good controls. It has the system where you can choose which level you want to play first. Just really, really, really fun game, and I cannot recommend enough checking out Power Blade 1 if you get the chance. So here we are, Power Blade 2 finally comes up on the shelf. Of course, I tested it when I brought it home, but now it was finally time to give it the full playthrough treatment. The sequel to the game that began my NES adventure, and it was a fun game, but I think I still prefer the first one. It's funny how many times an NES game can have a sequel, and I found that I actually prefer the first one a little bit. Star Tropics being another example of that, and there'll be a few other ones as well we'll talk about at some point. Yeah, Power Blade 1 and 2, just really fun games. If you ever have the chance to check them out, I really recommend that you do, especially that first one. If you're a fan of the Mega Man games, you will not regret it. It's just really, really, really good. But then there you go. So I beat Power Blade 2, and it's kind of like, all right, so we've kind of entered a new territory here. We've really kind of passed now, that game that started everything. And we get into the Qs and the Rs where I left off. So for Q probably has my biggest NES accomplishment of 2023, and that would be Qbert, having to beat 9 worlds of Qbert, not even 8, because so often NES games will have 8 worlds. It seems like they're just kind of the precedence that's set. You can expect the game to have 8 worlds, but Qbert needs to be different. It had to have 9 worlds of 4 levels each, 36 levels of Qbert that you have to play without game overing more than 3 times. And that's a lot easier said than done in a game like Qbert, where just so much is going on. Getting those tiles set to the correct color, it seems so simple in the first world, but then they start introducing different gimmicks, like if you jump on a tile that's already been jumped on again, it switches back. You need to jump on tiles multiple times. Not to mention that there's enemies who will show up who will also change the colors of the tiles, so all of that calculated in, that's a lot of levels you have to clear. With some really, really cheap gimmicks thrown in there at times. But to be able to finally beat Qbert, and not only that, I did it on stream with all of you, so that was a really, really fun moment. And that was definitely the most difficult NES game that I beat in 2023. Again, even though we beat ones like The Last Starfighter and some other really difficult ones, Mutant Virus, Qbert was in a league of its own. But with that, I think we're just about ready to wrap up here. So again, we started our conversation kind of here because that was, where we began, 2023. But it even kind of started back here a little bit with, I think, Harlem Globetrotters was like the last thing I had beat by the time that we talked about, oh god, the battery's dying, so we better wrap this up quick. By the time we, finished that November video. And now we're all the way to like down here. And yeah, just been a really great year. So before the battery dies, or the memory card dies, or whatever's going on, thank you all so much for all your support in 2023. It's been a really wonderful year, and I hope to see you again in 2024 for more fun, NES or otherwise. So thanks everyone, take care, and see you in the new year.